Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of How to Maintain Happiness Throughout Your Life. Today, I'm going to discuss the book, it was an audible book for me, Atomic Habits by James Clear. This was a #1 bestseller, and that's not surprising because most of us struggle with developing good habits and breaking bad habits. So let me get into it. I'll start my slideshow here. There we go. And then, so here's a book here, Tiny Changes, Remarkable Result. So the first thing, he starts out with the fundamentals, why tiny changes make a big difference. So if we're going to talk about habits, one thing we want to talk about is, well, what do we mean by habit? So I don't know where he pulled the definition from, but he says, a behavior or routine performed regularly and sometimes automatically. And then you look at the title, and I did scratch my head on this. What does he mean by atomic habits? So what he means by atomic is instead of developing a habit that has a lot of activities around it, start small, like at the atomic level, and develop small little habits that build into bigger, better habits. So, and then he talks about a study that he did, or not he did himself, but somebody did, and it found that about 40 to 50% of our daily activities are done out of habit. So we really are, it proves that we really are creatures of habit. So they did some studies. Again, I didn't make any notes as to what study they did, but there are 4 steps to developing a habit. He says good habit, but I think it's applicable to both good and bad habits. So the first step is a cue. And then the second step is we get a craving. And then the third step is we respond in some way. And then the fourth step is we get a reward. That reward could be positive or negative. So the book really revolves a lot around that. So we'll dive deeper into that as we get through the book. So one of the things that the reason where he starts with this is that if you've ever been in the business world and they talk about incremental improvements, and I don't remember exactly how it works out, but if you can make a 1% improvement to your bottom line each month, then over the year that's going to create quite a significant improvement in your margins over a year. So, and there's many things like that. It's not about making big drastic improvements. Often things are easier if we can just make little small increments, but cumulatively over time they turn into quite big results. And then he sort of briefly touches on why is a good habit hard to keep. And one of the reasons, and he'll go through other reasons too, but one of the reasons is that often with a good habit, you don't see any results. And you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're not getting any results. But with a good habit, sometimes there's a turning point. And once you hit that turning point, then you start seeing some improvement. So I think a classic example is if you go to the gym. I personally do not like going to the gym, but if you do, or if you think that might be something for you, one of the things you'll find is you go to the gym, you work out, you won't find any changes for a while, and then it's only after a certain amount of time of doing it they'll hit a point where you actually start to realize, wait, I'm a lot healthier now, and you start seeing those benefits of going to the gym. Then he starts going into one of the problems that we have is that when we want to develop a habit, we focus that habit around a goal. And he argues that's misguided, and I would tend to agree with him. One of the first things that I would say is that um, that comes at a disadvantage with goals is that humans are extremely adaptable. The reason why our species survived through the ice age is not because we were bigger, stronger, or anything like that. It's because we adapted to the environment. But the downside of that is we become adaptable to our current state. So a classic example I would say is that I would argue that someone who buys a Ferrari, they're probably absolutely thrilled when they drive off the lot that they're now driving in a Ferrari. But I would suspect after maybe, a certain amount of time, maybe after a year, it just becomes a car to them. It's not no big deal that they're driving around in a Ferrari. They've adapted to that situation. So what he argues instead is focus on our systems. Which he argues these are the tools that help you achieve your goal. So an important point here is that he states you do not rise to the level of your goals, you sink to the level of your systems. So, which I completely agree with. And then he goes into the link between identity and habits. So one of the things is if we have a habit that's not in alignment with our identity, it's much, much harder to keep that up. It's much easier to keep habits, choose habits, and develop habits that are in alignment with our identity. And I would rephrase that as our desired identity. It may not be our identity now, but it could be our identity in the future. And then he sort of goes into a bit of stuff which to me was reminiscent of Dr. Joe Dispenza, if you're familiar with his work. So Joe Dispenza has a phrase, thinking, doing, being. And what he means by that is that our thoughts influence our behavior, and our behavior determines who we are in life. So if we can change, in the Joe Dispenza argument, if we can change our thoughts, then we can change our behavior. And if we can change our behavior, we can change our identity. So a classic example is if you're trying to quit smoking and someone offered you a cigarette, you're better off saying, I'm not a smoker, than you are saying, I am trying to quit smoking. In the first example, you are identifying as a non-smoker, therefore not smoking is in line with your identity. In the second example, you're still a smoker, but you're trying to quit, and it becomes much harder to refuse or decline that cigarette. So then it comes to the question as to why do we have habits? Well, what habits do is they relieve the burden. If we didn't have habits, we'd have to deliberate and think about everything that we do in life. So a good example, and I'm guilty of this too, is many people go to the same restaurants when they go out for dinner. And I literally do. I go to the same restaurant. I don't want to have to go through Yelp reviews and Google reviews, and I don't want to take that risk. Like, what if I spend $50 on the meal and the service is horrible, or I don't like the food? So I go back to the same place every time. So, and there are many things that we do like this. So where we operate out of automatic behaviors. It just makes life simpler for us. So then he dives deeper a little into the cue, craving, response, and reward, and puts a greater definition on it. So a more detailed definition. So a cue is when the brain is triggered to initiate a behavior. A craving is a desire to change an internal state. Obvious example is if you're hungry, that's a craving that's motivating you to get something to eat. The response is the behavior or thought, it can be a thought, that we engage in to try to change that internal state. Now, he does make the mention that we must have the ability to respond. So, if you have a craving to be a basketball player, but you're not a tall person, then that's probably not something that's possible for you to do. Then the reward will be positive or negative. It's positive. Our brain registers that and says, okay, well, that's a behavior I will repeat on in the future. If it's negative, then the brain registers, I'm going to avoid that behavior in the future. So, how to work with these 4 steps? He creates what he calls the 4 laws. So, for the cue, we want to make it obvious. That is law 1. For the craving, we want to make it attractive. That is law 2. For the response, we want to make it easy. That is law 3. And for the reward, we want to make it satisfying. That is law 4. And then if you want to break a bad habit, you just invert the above, or invert these laws, I guess. So for the cue, you want to make it invisible. For the craving, you want to make it unattractive. For response, you want to make it difficult. And for the reward, you want to make it distasteful. So now we go into law 1. So one of the things he goes into is our brains are designed to look for patterns. And there are studies that prove that our brain will see patterns in things where there are actually no patterns. So often, and this is true, some of our automatic behaviors are the result of us recognizing a false pattern. So one of the things that he goes into is what's called a habit scorecard. So that's a good place to start. Look at the habits that you do, and do I guess at the end of the day, this is really what this is called, is just a habit review. And then you list out your habits, and then you categorize each habit as good, bad, or neutral. And then you put a plus sign beside it if it's good, put a minus sign beside it if it's bad, an equal sign beside it if it's neutral. And then add up the pluses and minus. I guess you can ignore the neutral. And see, are you engaging in more positive habits or engaging in more negative habits? So and then once you, this will motivate you to say, okay, well, what new habits can I develop? So one of the things where you can start is what he calls an implementation intention. So this is a phrase, probably best to write it down, where he goes, I will do, and then you put down the desired behavior at certain time in a certain location. And those 3 elements, well, the desired behavior, of course, is important, but the time and location is very important. It creates a commitment that you end up making, right? So let's say you want to go to the gym. So I will go to the gym at 6 p.m. on 51st and 2nd Street gym. So now we have a time and location. Then the other thing too is he talks about habit stacking. So basically what that means is to insert a new habit into a habit that you're already doing, right? So basically if you want to get more active, let's say you go to the grocery store every Saturday, then maybe to insert a habit, you would have to do this habit before, of course, but leave a half an hour earlier and go for a half an hour walk and go to the grocery store. That's assuming that you walk to the grocery store. I do go to the grocery store. So, and then he talks about in habit stacking in a negative sense. So he talks about the Diderot effect. You can look that up, Diderot effect. And just in a nutshell, I think it was Catherine the Great. He was in debt. I can't remember why she gave money, but she gave him a significant sum of money, and I think it started off with a robe. He bought a nice fancy robe. And then what that did was, because of the robe didn't fit in with other things, he bought another piece of thing for his house, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then eventually, after a while, he was actually had spent all his money, and then he ended up in debt. So, and that's a classic example. We often do that with clothes, right? We buy a piece of new clothing, and then we realize, oh well, we need something new to go with it, and then that leads to something new and something new. Uh, so that's on the negative side. But then on the positive side, we can use that to our advantage. So another example is that um, after my morning coffee, I can write a to-do list. And then after my to-do list is completed, I will meditate for 15 minutes. So here you see, okay, I'm starting off with that behavior I'm already habituated to do, and then just tacking on little things to do. I would argue that, and I think he does get into this too, is that you don't want to stack too much. You know, stack maybe one thing. Once that becomes a habit, you have two activities that are a habit. Then insert a third, and once that becomes a habit, insert a fourth. And then now we're talking about cues, of course, and humans are visual creatures, right? So if we can redesign our visual environment, we can encourage us to engage in in better habits, more healthy habits. So an example, and I've actually done this, is that I have a fruit bowl and I fill it with apples because I like apples. That gives me a more obvious cue, and it also makes it easy, right? I just reach for the apple and eat it. It makes it easy because I love potato chips. But if the apples are there, I'm less likely to eat my potato chips. Another thing, and he doesn't really talk about this too, as you notice, for bad habits, you want to make it invisible. And if you've ever seen any shows about people trying to lose weight, one of the first things that I guess they're called weight coaches, will do is they'll go through the pantry and the fridge, and they'll throw out all the unhealthy food. And that's an important point, because if you want to start eating healthy, then just don't bring unhealthy food into the house. And if it's not there and you realize, oh, well, I want a bag of chips, and then you realize, oh, well, I got to, especially if you live in a winter climate, I got to put on my boots, put on my jacket, scarf, hat, go out the door, walk or drive to the grocery store, pick up the bag of chips. You're going to think, oh, forget it, I'll just have something else. And then an interesting study that he brings into, again, to drive home the point about environment. This is not necessarily environment design, but they found, I don't know who they is, but I'm assuming the generals of the Vietnamese War. They found that a large portion of the soldiers had actually become addicted to heroin. And they were concerned because when their tour of duty was finished, they were going to come back to the United States, and now we have a bunch of veteran heroin addicts. So they were trying to figure, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, while they were figuring out what to do about it, they found out that actually the majority of soldiers who came back to the United States from Vietnam stopped using heroin. And they realized that what it was a change of environment, right? When you're not living in a mud ditch and getting shot at, and with a possibility of dying and seeing your friends die, that's of course a very stressful environment. Once you take away that stress, the heroin use no longer served them. So certainly, if as many of you know about the Vietnam War, many of them did come back with addiction problems, and it was pretty. They had some very difficult lives after having their tour of duty. So the next thing we go into is the law to make it attractive. And one of the things that we do live in a world with our modern technology is we have the science to make a lot of things super real. So, um, so I will use an example of food, right? So a lot of the food that is like potato chips, it's filled with basically what our body craves most, and the thing that gives us a dopamine hit is salt, sugar, and fat. So potato chips have that, the food scientists designed it in such a way that it gives us that dopamine hit. That's why not everyone, but many, many people, including myself, love potato chips. In Canada, we have something called poutine, which hits all of those things. It's basic. For those of you who don't know, it's French fries with gravy and cheese curds. Uh, so, this goes into the idea of again the neurochemicals. It sort of ties in with the rewards that we get, right? So, but one of the things is that when we have rewards for certain things, our brain releases neurochemicals. Okay, there are various ones, but one of the more important ones is dopamine. Uh, Dopamine is often involved in addiction. So I believe, if I remember correctly, gambling addicts, that's what they're going after. They're going after a dopamine hit. And then what happens, actually, just as an aside, your dopamine receptors get worn out. So it becomes harder and harder to get that dopamine hit over time. So, basically, one of the things that he goes into is social pressure, I guess. We can leverage that. So, basically, we imitate three groups in life: those who are close to us. We imitate what he calls the many, or the society at large. And we imitate he says the power of what I would say the rich and famous. So, if you want to leverage the social proof, I guess I'll use that word, for people who are close to you, one of the things that he recommends is to join a group that is already doing the behavior that you want to be doing. So actually, that I didn't think of this, but a perfect example is AA, right? If you want to quit drinking, and this is very important because for two reasons. AA, you're now in a social group of non-drinkers. The other thing, too, in my understanding is that when you join AA and you get a sponsor, they will encourage you, which is unfortunate, but it's a necessary step, is you have to let go of your friends who are still alcoholics. If you hang around with those people, you are more likely to go back into your alcoholism. So now, as far as the many, we do often imitate the behaviors of the society at large. And there is a study which blew my mind. So basically, what the study involved was they were showing cards. I think with one card had a line and another card had various lines, and you basically had to say which of the lines, the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, was the same length as the other one. So what they did was they hired actors, and then they brought in a study participant. And the actors were told to give an obviously wrong answer. What they found was that now at the beginning, if there was only one actor, one participant, then it was easier for the participant, the study participant, to contradict the actor and say, no, I think that line 3 is the same line. But what they found is that as you started to add in more actors, and now you had one study participant, maybe 5, 6 actors, then that study participant would actually start to, and just as a reminder, the actors were giving obviously wrong answers. Anybody who had their eyes open would notice that that it was wrong. The study participants would actually start to question their own perception of the situation and give the same answer as the actors. So that goes to show you just how strong um, uh, all of us are motivated to basically go with the crowd. Um, however, uh, this is a point where I would disagree with him. I would argue that for societies at large, for societies at large, many people have bad habits. So, and there are times in history where it was actually more you were making the right moral decision to go against what society believed in. So, and I think even in today's world, there are some applications of that thing. So, a classic example is consumerism. I think we all know that consumerism is bad, but we all fall for it. And then, of course, there's the third category of rich and famous. And again, maybe not, but I would replace that with gurus or people you admire, people who you really admire the way they live, and and again, it doesn't have to be rich and famous. It could be just someone in your personal circle that you really admire. You look at that person, you think, wow, they got they are doing life really well, and maybe befriend that person and try to imitate some of their habits. So, um, so another thing too that he starts to get into is how to fix bad habits. And he mentions Alan Carr's Easy Way to Quit Smoking. And apparently, I've never been a smoker, so I can't relate to this, but apparently, this was a great book, and it was very, very successful. And many people who read the book said it helped them quit smoking. And what he did was he reframed all the activities associated with smoking. So then, uh, and then one of the things is we have to understand why we engage in certain behaviors. So I don't know where this comes from, but we engage in behaviors for certain reasons, and I think he mentioned that these are just some examples. I think there are other examples, but one of them is conserve energy, obtain obtain food and water, find love and reproduce, connect and bond with others, win social acceptance and approval, reduce uncertainty, achieve status and prestige, and others. So, and then just to reiterate, that reward phase, the positive or negative reward, determines whether or not we will do an action again. So, so that's basically the make it attractive thing. So, and then the last thing he gets does is if there's any chore that you have to do, try to replace the word have to with get to. So rather than I have to do the dishes, say I get to do the dishes. Or I have to get up for work today to I get to get up for work today. So that's an awkward phrase, I admit, but basically, yeah, anything that you find a chore, just say I get to do this activity. Which again, of course, that obviously will make that activity more attractive to you. So then we get into the make it easy thing. So he starts out this section with a study that a photography teacher did. So basically, he wanted his students to do a project, but he split them up into two groups. The one group, he said, I want you to take as many pictures as possible. Just keep snapping away, and I want you to focus on quantity. Then the other group, he said, I want you to focus on getting the best pictures that you can. So the lighting, the composition, all the other stuff. I'm not a photographer, but I know that there's certain elements that basically make for a good picture. And then, of course, the question is, well, who came back with the best pictures? Now, a lot of people would assume that it's the group that focused on quality, that took their time and tried to figure out, okay, how to get the best shot. But what the photographer teacher actually found was it actually happened to be the quantity, the quantity students that actually came back with the best pictures, right? So, so this basically means that we can get bogged down in doing something perfectly, and this does come into habits, right? It's better to do a poor job at a habit than it is to do a perfect job at a habit. Um, and basically that shows if you understand the concept of practice, the more you do the habit, the better you will get at it anyhow. So you don't have to do it perfect the first time. Uh, then he goes into, you might have heard the phrase, perfection is the enemy of good. Uh, he said it came from Voltaire, but I did a quick Google search, and Google search is, and again, not relying on Google. They're an advertiser first and a search engine second. So it attributed it to Montesquieu. I don't quite know who Montesquieu is, and I'm going to say it in French. What it was le mieux est l'ennemi mortel du bien. Which I guess the roughest translation is perfection is the enemy of good. So, me being a musician, I was told often throughout when I had instructors that if you have 3 hours to practice, you will actually see better improvement if you do half an hour practice over 6 days. Then you sit down for 3 hours one day and practice. So that drives home the point that it's much better to do little practice sessions frequently than it is to do long practice sessions occasionally. So so basically, he argues against this question that people have: is that how long will it take me to master a skill? Instead, we should be asking how many repetitions does it take to master a skill? So, um, so basically, to drive home the point is that you don't want to be perfect. You just want to do the activity as poorly as you can, and then it will get better over time. So basically, he comes up with this 2-minute rule. So when you want to start a new habit, and this has to, of course, assume that the habit is comprised of various activities. The first activity should take less than 2 minutes, right? That makes it so easy to do that you're going to do it even when you don't feel like it. So let's say you want to develop a jogging habit, right? Just start with just putting on your jogging shoes. And taking them off. And I would argue it's going to be weird to put on your jogging shoes and take it off, right? But I would argue try that for a while, and then and you're going to get annoyed. It's like, well, why am I just doing this? So then go to the next thing. Put on your jogging shoes and just go for a short walk and come back. And then once that becomes a habit, then go for a longer walk, and then go for a faster walk, and then go for a longer and faster walk, and just keep adding on until you are now doing like a half-hour jog. Let's say that was your goal, and you will find with some activities, especially when the habit is developed, you can't stop. Right? Once you initiate the activity, to stop it, you're going to feel weird. You're going to feel out of balance, really. So, and the reason is that we have momentum with our actions. So we have a tendency to keep doing the things that we're doing. And again, I don't know if he mentions this, but this is why modern research is showing that multitasking is a bad idea. For a while, it was in vogue there, but our brains aren't designed to flip from one activity to the next. We're much better off starting an activity, completing it, and then moving on to the next activity. And I'm going on a tangent here, but the reason being is that, and I find this too, when you switch from activity A to activity B, there's a certain amount of time that you need to spend just getting yourself reoriented to where you left off with activity B. So if you're going back and forth between activity A and activity B, a lot of time is wasting just reorienting yourself to the new activity. So, and then of course I don't know why he states it here, but inverting the four laws, right? So if you want to break a bad habit, make it invisible, make it unappealing, make it hard, make it distasteful. And then he goes on to a story about Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo was procrastinating on a manuscript that was due to his publisher. And because he was procrastinating, he got frustrated with himself and he took a drastic action. And he told his assistant to lock away his regular clothes. So he was only able to go around in pajamas. Now, this being the time of Victor Hugo, it would have been quite unacceptable to leave the house with his pajamas. So he literally stayed in the house 6 months. I'm assuming he had assistants. Well, he did have. He must have had the assistant go out and get him groceries and other stuff. So he just worked at it for 6 months to write this novel. The novel that he ended up writing was The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So if you haven't heard of it, that's probably one of the most famous novels from Victor Hugo. So then we go into the last law. So, and again, this is the ties into the reward, negative or positive. So, not surprisingly, we repeat behaviors that give us a reward, right? So, one of the things that he drives home is that the first three laws make it more likely that we'll do a desired behavior the first time. The fourth law will make it more likely that we do the desired behavior a second time. So this fourth law is what results in us wanting to repeat that behavior. So when you're developing a good habit, you want to try to design it in a way that you have immediate satisfaction, right? And you want to do the inverse for bad habits. And then he also explains why when it comes to terms of rewards, why bad habits are hard to break and good habits are hard to develop. And the reason being is bad habits typically provide immediate satisfaction and delayed negative consequences. So an example is poor eating and lack of exercise, right? You don't really see any negative consequences of poor eating and poor exercises, possibly for decades, right? And then all of a sudden your body will start breaking down. And then good habits are actually the inverse of that, right? So there is no immediate satisfaction and the rewards don't pay off for some time. So, for instance, saving money, right? There are many people who don't save for retirement, and the reason being is that it sucks to put money aside, and then you're foregoing your vacations and your electronic toys and your expensive restaurants and other things you want to do. And basically, I guess what I'm saying there is you're foregoing joy in the present moment for for joy that you will have, or an easier life that won't happen for decades into the future. So it's very hard to keep that going. So basically, the point being is, if you want to keep a good habit going, add in a little immediate reward. But the caveat there is to don't make that reward in contradiction to the good habit you're trying to develop. So, and I've heard of this too. People go to the gym and then they'll go out for ice cream or go get themselves a burger. That's not the way to do it, because that's contradictory to your identity. Maybe a possibility, and I really had to think about this a lot because I don't go to the gym. But the best I could come up with is maybe finding your favorite healthy smoothie, right? And then once you're done with the gym, reward yourself with that smoothie. It is hard to do that, but certainly within the realm of possibilities. Another thing, too, that he talked about was a habit tracker. So he used the example of a stockbroker, a young stockbroker, and he developed it. And again, goes into the systems, right? Just to reiterate, we don't rise to the level of our goals; we sink to the level of our systems. So the stockbroker, if you know anything about stockbroking, cold calling is a key part of that job. So basically what he did was he came into work, he had a jar filled with 120 paper clips and an empty jar. And he would start cold calling. Every cold call he made, he moved one paper clip from the full jar into the empty jar. When the empty jar became full, then he knew he was done with this cold calls for the day. That ensured that every single day he was making 120 cold calls, which is a lot. But because of that work, he actually became one of the most successful brokers in the company. So there are three benefits to having a habit tracker. One, it makes the habit obvious, right? You can look. There are apps for Android and Apple out there, but you can also get like yourself a calendar that you put on your desk and mark things down. So it's right there in front of me, or right in front of you rather. And then also you get the progress you're making is right there in front of you. And then the other thing too, the other advantage is that it can gamify the development of the habit, which then you start to get addicted to the game. So then it's more easy to develop that habit. And then the third point is that once, as you see your progress, you'll feel a sense of accomplishment, so it'll make it satisfying. Okay. The downside, of course, is that with a habit tracker, you have to develop two habits, not one. So you have to develop the habit itself and the habit of tracking the habit. So, and then the other thing too, to stick with a good habit, is don't be hard on yourself if you miss a thing. So I'll give you a personal example. I wanted to develop a meditating habit, and I would miss it once in a while. And then I found that I was getting frustrated with myself for not meditating. And then after I was frustrated for a while, it became clear to me that it's absurd to be frustrated over developing a meditation habit. So basically, I did my best, but over time of trying for a while, it took me a while, but over time of trying, it is now a habit for me. Every day after work, I meditate for 30 minutes. So, and again, that goes back to that implementation intention. It's not conscious for me, but every day I will meditate on my couch at 6 p.m. after work. So you have the activity, the time, and location. So that's important to do it. And then the other thing too is just when you're measuring a habit, make sure you're measuring the right thing. So this made me think. He didn't talk about this, but made me think of a documentary that I saw of a doctor who was treating um, people who were morbidly obese. So if you don't know what morbidly obese means, that's for anybody with a body mass index over 40. And and um, and he said in the documentary that these people get discouraged because they didn't see the weight coming off, right? And he'd have to say to them, stop focusing on the weight because, and he was a doctor, of course, because your vital signs have made drastic improvements. You have lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower blood sugars, and on and on and on. So, so that's and again, I would say that is that if losing weight is is a goal of yours, uh, I would caution against focusing on the weight for two reasons. One is that uh, you may not see the weight come off as fast as you want. The other thing too I would add in is that typically if you go to the gym and you start lifting weights, you're not going to see any weight change because what's happening is your fat is turning into muscle and muscle's more dense. So you'll look thinner, but you might end up maintaining the same weight or just shedding a few pounds. So focus on your health, not so much on the weight. And then the other thing too, just to sort of wrap up this chapter, to make it, I don't know if this falls into the satisfying. Um, yeah, maybe it does in terms of reward. Finding an accountability partner. So team up with a friend or family member and then decide upon a negative consequence if you fail to do your desired behavior. So, and apparently this sounds surprising, but apparently if you put it down in writing, you get your accountability partner to sign it and you sign it. I don't know if it's research, but apparently this will um, raise the likelihood of you engaging that habit a lot more. So, uh, and again, often in 12 steps, that's part of the reason for having a sponsor. Is you have an accountability partner, but it doesn't have to be just for addictions. It can be for other things that you want to do. So I don't have a bullet point for this, but then he uh, sort of has like an epilogue or a thing. So one of the things that he discusses talent. So he gets into the nurture versus nature argument. And we've all heard that. My personal opinion is that I don't think one is more important than the other. Simply because the argument I use is you have people who grew up with horrible genetics, and parents were alcoholics. Even the nurture part. Well, actually, I'm using maybe the other way around it, but grew up in horrible circumstances, poor, alcoholism, maybe abuse, and they turned out to go into well-adjusted, healthy adults who sometimes even become successful in life. Uh, and then you have other people who come from very very privileged circumstances, and they turn into complete. They have horrible lives as adults. So I really do think it's a mixture of the two, nurture and nature. So what he does get into though is, and he doesn't say it, but I think I would argue that this is really only in the competitive arena that you have genetics and personality that will make certain activities in a competitive environment where you're more likely or less likely to succeed. So he goes into the 5 personality traits. So 1, openness to experience. 2, conscientiousness. 3, extroversion versus introversion. 4, agreeableness. 5, neuroticism. So basically, if you're going into a competitive field, you don't want to go into something where your genetics or personality are incongruent. Now, you might think salespeople salespeople, you have to be an extrovert. That is actually proven not to be the case. There are many successful salespeople who are actually introverts. Uh, but a classic example is if you want to be a basketball player, and you're vertically challenged, then probably not the best choice for you. One of the things that I would argue, and just he doesn't talk about this, but just to emphasize, is that if you're doing anything in the arts, there, even though we have awards for best new artist or blah blah blah, the arts are not really a competitive environment. Uh, Sometimes, they're like I myself. I don't think Jackson Pollock had artistic talent. He just dribbled paint on a canvas, but people love him. People say he was, and sometimes lack of skill actually can make you break new barriers. Another one is punk rock music. It was actually a disadvantage if you actually were good at your instrument or you sang well. So, and then he also talks about how life is a series of explorations and exploitations. So, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Explore life, explore different things, and then if you get led on to something that, hey, I kind of like doing this, try it for a while. That's the exploiting phase. Try it for a while, and maybe it becomes into a new activity that you love doing, or maybe not. Maybe it'll die off. And then he talks about excellence. And then basically the point with if you want to become excellent at something, you have to be comfortable with boredom. So, and again, I'll go back to my musical experience. I'll tell you, if you want to get good at an instrument, you have to practice your scales. So, I was a jazz guitar player, and if you want to get good at jazz guitar, you have to practice all the different, and believe me, in jazz, there are a lot of different scales you have to know, and it's boring. It's boring to do those scales over and over and over and over again, but that has to become so automatic that when you're in a live situation and you're improvising over a tune, you can't be thinking, oh well, C7 sharp 9. What scale do I play for that? You can't even you don't have time to think that. Your fingers have to automatically go to the scale appropriate for a C7 sharp 9. And then just to drive home that thing, John Coltrane, if you haven't heard of him, he's one of the giants of jazz, and definitely a virtuoso on saxophone. And it is said that he practiced 12 hours a day, which I'm sure was extremely boring. So, and then another thing too is that with our habits, we don't want to become complacent. Because I guess that ties off the boring part. We don't want life itself to become boring. We don't want to get into a rut because life is meant to be experienced. So it's good to do a review of your habits, and I think a life review, maybe every 6 months or maybe every year. But let's say it's a yearly review, and ask yourself certain questions. What went well this year? What didn't go well this year? What did I learn this year? What are the core values that drive my life and work? How am I living and working with integrity right now? How can I set higher standards for myself in the future? And there are, of course, many other ones that that you can add. And then basically that will do is just ensure that your habits are in alignment with your desired identity. So, and then just to keep in mind that life is in constant change. So, so it's important to constantly review ourselves. So that's basically it. That's the whole of the book. I say it was a pretty good read. I've been wanting to. I ordered this book a while ago on my Audible, and I've been procrastinating, truth be told. But I knew when I ordered the book, it's that the habits that we do have a great impact on whether or not we whether the quality of our life, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Good habits lead to a good quality life. Bad habits lead to a poor quality life. And again, just to drive home the point, uh, don't become so ascetic, I guess, or so hard on yourself that you don't allow yourself any guilty pleasures. It's more the habitual form of it, right? So a bad habit done habitually is going to lead to negative consequences, but you know, I myself, I enjoy the odd beer once in a while. That's not a problem. But if I were drinking, a case of beer every day, then of course that becomes a problem. So anyhow, thank you for listening. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you like these kinds of talks and you like the information that I'm putting out there, maybe think about subscribing, and you'll be notified of any videos that I put out in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and take care.